Welcome, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel as we try to build this thing up. Green Bay turning the page after an ugly Week 17 loss in Minnesota to the Vikings, now getting set to take on the Bears in Week 18 regular season finale, home finale in all likelihood, right? Something crazy would have to happen for Green Bay to have another home game this season. Can't call it a meaningless game ever against the Chicago Bears. You want to keep that win streak going against them, move it from 11 to 12 games. We'll have final thoughts on that matchup, a preview, things of that nature in videos later on in the week. I wanted to jump on and really, for purposes of this video, talk about sort of expectations the rest of the way that the fans have, that Packer fans have for the team. I just think Sunday's game against the Vikings, and I hope I'm wrong, felt like a little bit of a pivot point. Nationally, definitely on a national scale, and maybe on a more localized scale as well for Packer fans. And again, I hope I'm wrong, but this felt like a game where, going into it, everyone nationally, I heard Rich Eisen on his podcast, Colin Cowherd on clips I'm seeing on Twitter, the folks on NFL Live on ESPN, every single one of them saying with no hesitation entering this game on Sunday, Green Bay is the team in the NFC you don't want to see. They're going to be a wild card team. They can't win the NFC North. They are, if you're the Rams, if you're the Falcons, if you're the Buccaneers, now if you're the Eagles, it was you don't want to see the Green Bay Packers. Coming out of Sunday's loss to the Vikings, where Green Bay trailed 20-3 at one point and 27-10, made it interesting late but still came up short. The narrative has sort of shifted to they're a good team. They're not a real good team. They can't beat anyone that has a better record than them. And it's valid. They're 0-5 this year now against teams with a better record than them. They won't have a chance to best that on Sunday when they welcome in the Bears, who haven't won since before Halloween, which is still just a crazy, crazy thing to think about. But I'm wondering and kind of thinking out loud, like, what expectations for the Packers should be the rest of the way, because I do think Sunday's loss could have a mental toll, some mental wear and tear on this team. Like, they're not naive. It's impossible to stay off social media completely or to stay off your phones completely. Like, everyone's entrenched and glued to their phones on a daily basis at some point in time, usually throughout the day for a lot of people. These athletes are the same way. Now, they're not going to come out. No one on the Packers is going to come out and say, like, yeah, we see what everyone's saying on Twitter. It sucks. They're saying we can't beat a good team and blah, blah, blah. Like, they're aware of it. They're aware of what the narratives are and how things have pivoted after what we saw on Sunday. And we kept hearing that phrase thrown about with this game for Green Bay in Week 17. This was a litmus test. I said it in the instant reaction video. You kept hearing it over and over and over again from everyone, like, oh, this is going to be a big test for Green Bay. This is kind of see where they fall in the pecking order. Can they go on the road, because they're going to have to do it in the playoffs, and beat a really good team like Minnesota? And, final score would say, man, they came up just short, but it was pretty ugly for like 3 quarters, almost 3.5 quarters. I'd say 3, because early on in the first quarter, the first couple drives, the defense for Green Bay stood pretty tall as the offense kind of wiggled its way around to try to find a groove and couldn't, quite frankly, early on. But the litmus test phrase that was tossed around fairly easily by most people. I'm not going to come out here and say, like, oh, the Packers failed the litmus test. Like, it's doom and gloom. They're done. They're torched. The season's over. But there is sort of an empty feeling after that loss to the Vikings, because you look at the resume for Green Bay and it's like, well, what is their best win right now? Is it Houston? Is it the Rams when they didn't have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua? Like, the Rams team that Green Bay beat in L.A. early on in the season it's just not the same L.A. Rams team. They were missing a couple of offensive linemen along with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. And so is it the Rams win? Is it the win against the Texans? Is it the win against Seattle, which was a dominant and convincing win for the Packers? That win in a standalone game on Sunday Night Football just a couple of weeks ago started to open up eyes to a lot of people, because Seattle was playing for a whole hell of a lot at the time. Now they've since been eliminated from the postseason. But Green Bay went on the road and just spanked the Seahawks, wasn't it 30-13 or something like that? And a lot of people are like, this Packers team is awfully dangerous. Now after, one more loss on Sunday against Minnesota, it's sort of the gears have shifted a little bit, at least for people nationally. And, I will say I fell guilty to it. I fell for the trap a little bit. I did go into this game against the Vikings thinking, if Green Bay beats Minnesota, buckle up. Like, I too had been waiting for one of these, I don't want to call it a signature win, but one of those, wins where it felt like a big moment in an elevated spot. And each time Green Bay's had that opportunity, I think week 1, you're traveling to Brazil, you're playing Philadelphia on a neutral field, and the field was a mess for both teams. Like that, there was just a lot going on in that game before the game and the lead up. And you're playing on a Friday night in Brazil, week 1. It was a big game, big moment, but I look more towards these 4 division games, 2 against Detroit, 2 against Minnesota, where Green Bay just, in at least 3 of them, couldn't get out of their own way. They could not stop shooting themselves in the foot, and they did it again on Sunday against the Vikings, and you're just waiting for those critical errors and the ones that are fixable, the ones that can be edited to go away or at least be negated heavily. And in Green Bay, they just come in droves and they come in piles when they play against Minnesota and Detroit specifically this year in these big games, if you want to call it as such. So yeah, I went into Sunday's game thinking if they beat Minnesota, watch out. Like, yeah, this team's going to be playing with a lot of juju, a lot of good vibes going into the playoffs. I still think that's the case, but let's be frank about this, and I'll talk about this more in the final thoughts video. Green Bay you can't lose on Sunday to Chicago, because then you're really going to have some dark thoughts entering the playoffs. Like, I'm assuming Matt LaFleur is going to play starters because you are still playing for something. If Green Bay wins and if Big Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys can beat Washington on Sunday, Green Bay avoids the 7th seed. They avoid going to Philadelphia in the first round, which to me is a big deal. It really is. Is Philadelphia invincible, unbeatable? No, but you'd rather, in my opinion, go to LA or Tampa or Atlanta rather than going to Philadelphia in round 1. And it is simple for Green Bay. You beat the Bears and the Cowboys beat the Commanders. You don't need anything else to happen. You avoid the 7th seed in that scenario. I don't know. Dallas beat them earlier in the year in Washington. We'll have to see. But I'm assuming Matt LaFleur is going to play his starters. And so if it's, pedal to the metal, full throttle, let's move forward, a loss would be devastating for a lot of reasons. It's a rivalry game. You've won 11 in a row against Chicago. That's 2 losses against division foes going into the postseason. You're sort of not limping in from an injury standpoint, but from a psyche standpoint if you lose to the Bears. Where it gets pivoted is I expect Green Bay to win the game, assuming that they play their starters. It doesn't matter if you beat Chicago by 40 or by 3, in my opinion. It's a game you're expected to win. I think they're double-digit favorites, 10 points, I believe, when I last looked right after the game. On Sunday afternoon, I was looking at lines early on, and I think Green Bay opened at least as a 10-point favorite against Chicago. But it doesn't matter if you beat them by 40 or 3. The narrative doesn't shift because Chicago's a really bad team. The narrative is still going to be the jury's out on Green Bay entering the playoffs. Can they beat a good team or not? And so I think Sunday, unless you lose, I guess just getting a win and sort of maybe rolling some of that momentum into the postseason, knowing you're entering the playoffs with a W in hand, like you've got a win on your mind as the most recent game, helps a little bit, but I don't know how much. I just think Sunday was a real missed opportunity for the Packers. And when you talk about, I sort of buried the lead because I wanted to talk about expectations the rest of the way for Green Bay. By the way, it is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. Matt LaFleur said in his presser on Monday, one of the reporters asked him a question about these big games, and he was talking about Philly, Detroit, and Minnesota. And Matt LaFleur cut him off and said, every game is a big game in the NFL, And he said, the margins are razor thin in the NFL, and he's right. But he also knew what the reporters were sort of hinting at, and he knows that reality. And what's weird about this team to me is that I hinted at it. They can't get out of their way in these big matchups. Like, I'm trying to think of a comparison. Like I'm an Iowa Hawkeyes fan, and laugh at me if you want. They lost their bowl game to Missouri. I get it. Kirk Ferentz punted from Missouri's 39-yard line, not their own 39, from Missouri's 39 on 4th and 2. Just different story for a different day. But I'm going to try to compare something here. Iowa this year played Ohio State, and going into the shoe, I knew Iowa's not going to win. Like, it would take something catastrophic for Ohio State to lose this game and for Iowa to win. But going into that game, like when Iowa played Ohio State this year, it wasn't like the Hawkeyes soiled themselves. They didn't look like petrified of the moment. They had turnovers, but they forced a couple of Ohio State. The moment wasn't too big. They were only down 7-0 at halftime, but they got blown out. They lost 35-7, and they lost to Ohio State because they were outmatched. They didn't have the personnel. They didn't have the athletes. They don't have the 5 stars, and Ohio State's just a flat-out better team. I didn't look at that game and say, man, Ohio State is so much better coached than Iowa, or man, the moment was way too big for the Hawkeyes. It was just Ohio State's just better. That's all it was. And the year before that, Iowa got smoked by Penn State in Happy Valley, and it was the same case. The moment wasn't too big. That atmosphere is crazy in Happy Valley. It was a whiteout, and Iowa got smoked. But I didn't think the moment was too big. I just thought Penn State's just way better than the Hawkeyes. Up and down the roster, top to bottom, they fill it out better than the Hawkeyes do. And I say that to say this. When I watch the Packers against the Eagles in week 1, against Detroit twice, against Minnesota twice, we can eliminate things that aren't like the root issue for the Packers. The moment isn't too big. Sunday's loss to Minnesota, at no point in time was I watching that game and I came to the conclusion like, oh my gosh, Matt LaFleur's overwhelmed. Oh my gosh, Jordan Love, the lights are way too bright. Like, he got sacked 3 times. The offensive line, I thought, struggled. The offense really, really struggled to get into gear. They couldn't hit any of those deep shots. They couldn't hit any of those big, spark plays that we're used to seeing. But I do not think at any point in time I thought, man, this is just, the moment's too big for them. It's eating them alive. That wasn't it. They didn't look rattled. They weren't, like I said, with Iowa soiling themselves. Like, Iowa wasn't soiling themselves against Ohio State. Like, Green Bay wasn't pissing down their leg playing against Minnesota. That wasn't the issue. They match up with the Vikings. I think they match up with the Lions. And Detroit's got a lot of injuries. They won, but they just gave up 34 points to San Francisco, who's virtually playing for nothing, eliminated from the postseason. Now, Detroit won the game Monday night, 40-34. I watched that game thinking, Detroit's going to have to score 35-plus in the playoffs. They very well may do so, but they're going to have to score a lot of points because I don't think this defense is going to get any better. They're just ravaged with injuries. So I look at Green Bay and I'm like, okay, I don't think the moment's too big for them when they played Philadelphia or Detroit or Minnesota in any of those 5 matchups. They match up well with these teams roster-wise. Like, I don't look at the Vikings roster and say, holy crap, this is so much more of a polished product than whatever the hell Green Bay is dealing with. Green Bay is the youngest roster in the NFL, but it is a supremely talented roster, and there are key pillar pieces on both sides of the ball, in my opinion. So when they're playing Minnesota, they're playing Detroit, I do not look at it and say Green Bay's just outmatched. Like, when I watch Iowa, Ohio State, I'm like, Iowa just doesn't have the talent. They don't have the pieces. They can't stack up. It's an unfair chess match. Ohio State's playing checkers, right? And I was trying to play like 3D chess. It's not that case when the Packers are losing twice this year to Minnesota and twice to Detroit, where I'm just like, holy crap, Detroit's just got a supremely superior roster compared to the Green Bay Packers. It's not roster matchups. It's not the moment being too big. It is Green Bay's inability to stop the stupid stuff, to stop the stupid shit and the dumb mistakes. That's honestly, like, you can really, really zone in on it. Now, there's tentacles to that, and there's layers to that. It's not just one thing with the Packers that are the dumb mistakes happening. It is multiple in that one category. And I don't know how you try to minimize or which one you attack first, but it pops up repeatedly. And the difference in those games has been Green Bay's inability to negate or limit the stupid stuff. And I'm talking about dropped passes. I'm talking about pre-snap penalties where Wicks is covering up the tight end, where there's a pre-snap penalty on a false start that moves you from a 3rd and 1 to a 3rd and 6, and drop passes in key spots. That 4th and 2 where they went for it, or 4th and 3, whatever it was, just outside the red zone. It looked like Jordan Love was expecting Reed to kick it into gear, and Reed sort of pedaled down his speed. And so I think their chemistry was a little off there, or their rhythm wasn't quite in sync. But the ball still hit Reed in the hands. Although he was outstretched, you got to catch that. I don't know if I'd consider it like a horrifically dropped pass, but it's one that you have to have. And you look back at the game against Detroit at Lambeau Field, the first matchup against the Lions. Like, Green Bay's going in thinking, at worst, we're down, 1 possession at halftime. Let's figure it out. We're playing in not ideal conditions, but they're out here in the same conditions. And then Jordan Love throws a pick 6 to Kirby Joseph going at halftime, and you're like, what was that? Like, what was he possibly thinking? What could have possibly been the read there on a check down to Josh Jacobs, where he just threw it right into the lap of Kirby Joseph, who takes it back for 6 points? In this game against the Vikings on Sunday, you're driving, you're moving, you're grooving. The opening drive of the game, you're trying to set the tone, just like you did against Seattle, just like you did against New Orleans in the previous 2 games. Almost every team nowadays, whether it's high school, college football, you win the toss, you defer. You want to try to double up at the end of the first half, get the ball to start the 3rd quarter. And in the NFL, it's even bigger because you can't surprise onside kick. You have to announce, hey, we're onside kicking it. Whereas in college, If you're receiving first and you're behind the eight ball a little bit and you're like, let's roll the dice, let's onside kick it, start the second half, you can try to surprise your opponent. You can't do that in the NFL. You have to announce that you're onside kicking it. Green Bay has flipped that script the last 3 weeks now. They've gotten the ball first. They won the toss against Seattle, said, give it to us, went right down the field and scored. Won the toss against New Orleans on Monday night, said, give us the ball, went down the field and scored on the first drive. I don't know if they won the toss against the Vikings, but they got the ball first. They were driving right down the field. Dumb mistake. Josh Jacobs fumbles, his second in the last 3 games. Now, it's just those things you cannot do in a variety of ways against really good teams like Minnesota, like Detroit, like Philadelphia. You just can't. You can't have it. Like, if it was just Josh Jacobs' fumble on the opening drive, but they didn't have all these pre-snap penalties, I'd be like, okay. If it was just Josh Jacobs' fumble, but there weren't a couple of critical dropped passes, I'd be like, okay. Because every team's gonna have a couple of miscues, a couple of screw-ups in a game. It's just the nature of the beast. It's very hard to play a perfect, flawless game in the National Football League. And even if you come close to it, any head coach is going to tell you, there's plenty of room for improvement. The problem with Green Bay is when they're beating up on Arizona or they're beating up on New Orleans, or even with Malik Willis when they had Indianapolis in Tennessee on the radar, those 2 games that Malik Willis started and won earlier in the year, they might have had a couple of pre-snap penalties, but they didn't have any drop passes. They might have had 1 turnover, but they didn't have the pre-snap penalties. It was one area within that category of the dumb mistakes that I'm talking about, the stupid stuff, but it wasn't all of them. For whatever reason, when they're playing Minnesota, Detroit, Philadelphia, it piles up in all of those categories. And again, we saw that again on Sunday against the Vikings. But I go back to it. I don't think it's like the moment is too big for them. I really don't. I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's they're overexcited and juiced up and gassed up for these games against division foes who are ahead of them in the standings. But like Green Bay, talent-wise, can match up with the big dogs. Like, if you're just looking at rosters, Philadelphia's got a hell of a talented roster, and both sides of the ball. Saquon Barkley, over 2,000 yards, a brick wall of an offensive line, 2 awesome receivers, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Jalen Hurts, a true dual-threat quarterback. That's just the offense, right? Like, that's just the offense that Kellen Moore has been spearheading as the first-year OC in Philadelphia. Like, I look at Detroit, and I said they might have to put up 35 a game in the playoffs because their defense is just so riddled with injuries. Well, they put up 40 on Monday night against San Francisco to win. A couple weeks ago, they put up 34 in a walk-off win against Green Bay. And you're talking about they don't even have David Montgomery, but they have Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown. All of a sudden, this Patrick guy's awesome, Sam Laporta, and you still have Gibbs in the backfield and another incredible offensive line. All the questions about Sam Darnold. What is he? What isn't he? Is this real? Is he all of a sudden a star quarterback in the league? And for as good as Sam Darnold's been, he has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones, an incredibly talented offense in Minnesota. But I look at Green Bay, and I see a really good offensive line. I see Josh Jacobs. He's been one of the best running backs in the NFL this year. I see Tucker Kraft, one of the best young tight ends in the NFL. I see Jordan Love, who's good at creating off of play action and can extend plays and make it happen down the field. And I look at a wealth of options at the wide receiver spot. Do they have a Justin Jefferson? Do they have an A.J. Brown? They do not. But they have so many options that a defense has to worry about. Is this the game Watson goes off? Is this the game Dobbs goes off? Is this the game Jaden Reed gets heavily involved with 13, total looks, whether it's in the running game and the passing game? And so Green Bay, to me, talent-wise, matches up with the big dogs. It isn't a spot where they aren't ready for the moments or the spotlight's too big. They have to get out of their own way. They make the dumbass mistakes repeatedly in these games. And so the long way around this... Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Because I think the question is that many have after that loss. Do you feel differently after the loss to Minnesota? Like going into it, if you thought, hey, Green Bay can really make a run towards New Orleans, do you feel differently after that loss or do you feel the same? Or going into it, if you thought, I don't know, they're likely going to have to play 3 road games. That's tough to do. The NFC is pretty loaded. I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe they get 1. Certainly, maybe you feel the same after the loss to Minnesota. Maybe now you think they don't even get 1. I'm curious what the pulse is for other people. And when you talk expectations for the postseason, I'll boil it down to this. Can Green Bay win a game? And right now, a game, in all likelihood, means going to Philadelphia. Yes. Absolutely. I think Green Bay, I believe, I don't like saying I think in that spot. I believe Green Bay can absolutely win a playoff game. And quite frankly, I don't care if it's in Philly. I would prefer LA, Tampa, Atlanta for Green Bay's purposes. But if it's in Philly, so be it. Green Bay is talented enough. They are a polished enough product. They should be getting pieces, like you should be getting Evan Williams back. You should be getting Christian Watson back. Jair, I don't know. I feel like I should do an entirely separate video on whatever the hell's going on with the Jair Alexander situation. But you should be getting pieces back. Quay Walker, another one who, man, Quay Walker was exploding onto the scene before his injury. And now he's missed a couple of games. Edgerrin Cooper just played 99% of the snaps, 71 out of 72 against Minnesota. I was so happy to see that. I hope when Quay Walker comes back, and I love the contributions Eric Wilson has made, but why the hell not unleash Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper next to each other and give both of them the lion's share of the snaps? Give them close to 100% when they get back. Let's just, why not, at this point, if you're the Packers? So they should be getting pieces back. They're already, in my opinion, an immensely talented group. Yes, Green Bay can win a playoff game. Larger scale, zoom out the microscope. After what we saw Sunday, with what we've seen against just better competition, better teams this year, can the Packers rip off 3 straight all on the road and get to New Orleans? If you asked me entering Sunday's game, I would have probably said yes, it's possible. Now, while in my heart, I can't say no, it's impossible. I have serious doubts because to me, the resume just is what it is at this point. It's a good team. It's not a great team. It's a good team that can beat up on inferior opponents, that struggles to keep the train on the tracks against equal or better competition. It's just, they're 11-0 against teams with a worse record than them. They're 0-5 against teams with a better record than them. That's pretty cut and dry. It's not like, well, they're 1-4. What was that one? It's not like, oh, well, they're, 10-1 against teams below them, or 9-2, but 2-3 or 2-4, whatever it would be, 2-3 against teams above them. It's 11-0 teams with a worse record, 0-5 teams with a better record. It's cut and dry. And, Matt LaFleur said, and I don't blame him at all, but he said after the loss on Sunday, like right after the loss, he said he told his guys in the locker room that they have to, quote, earn the right to play Minnesota again. And that kind of stuck with me because he said the exact same line except sub out the word Minnesota for Detroit when Green Bay lost 34-31 in a game against the Lions where there were pre-snap penalties, there were drops, there was a Watson fumble. But I'm not zoning in on Watson, but he had a fumble. There were pre-snap penalties. It was a mess for much of that Detroit game. Green Bay got it back on track, took a lead in the third quarter, coughed it back up, and then couldn't finish it out against Detroit in a 34-31 loss. And Matt LaFleur said after that loss just a few weeks ago that Green Bay had to, quote, earn the right to play Detroit again, to go back to Detroit and play them for a third time. And I get it, but at some point, you kind of just have to, you are who you are, no? This is who Green Bay is. They're a good team, I think, capable of playing, their most complete games this year to me have been the Seattle win and I think the Arizona win with Jordan Love. Because, the Malik Willis games against Indianapolis and Tennessee were a clinic, but Green Bay was just running it 50 times a game, and the Titans and Colts just couldn't stop it for the life of them. I think the most complete games this year are Arizona and Seattle. If I'm missing one, forgive me, but I might be. But I think Seattle for sure and Arizona were their 2 most complete games. I want to believe they can do that against Philadelphia wildcard weekend, or if you go to LA or Tampa or Minnesota or Detroit. But they haven't done it against that caliber of a team. They beat the Rams. Was it a complete game? No, it was good. You went on the road and you won. That's never easy to do. But again, early in the year, that Rams team started 1-4. Now they've won the NFC West. They didn't have their top 2 options, top 2 wide receivers, I should say, because Kyron Williams is a stud at running back, and they were banged up on the offensive line. There's nothing Green Bay could do about that. They had to play LA when they played them. But it is a different Rams team. I want to believe Green Bay can put forth the performance they did against Seattle on the road again in the playoffs against Philadelphia. But can they do it 3 times in a row? That, if they haven't done it once against Philly or twice, or in the 2 games against Detroit or 2 games against Minnesota, does it not feel a little bit foolish to believe? We want to believe, right? We want to have faith. We want to have faith that they can get it done, that they can find some of that magic that they displayed last year in the playoffs as a 7 seed over Dallas in round 1, the 2 seed in a blowout win. Want to believe in that. But this team, with the errors that they've made in big games this year, is it possible or likely that they all of a sudden just flush that away for 3 straight games on the road? I think it's very unlikely. Entering Sunday's game against Minnesota, I did think differently. I did, because I thought they'd go into Minnesota. They had talked about, like, we know we need... Jordan Love didn't hide from it. He said at his locker in the lead up to the game against the Vikings, like, hey, we want to get them back. They beat us on our home field. They're a very good team. I'm paraphrasing, but he brought up, like, the note about Green Bay not playing well in, like, some of these bigger games. And I thought Green Bay would solve the Rubik's Cube against Minnesota, and they didn't. And now you go into the playoffs, likely as the 7 seed, could be the 6. And you're going to have to do it 3 straight times on the road. It'd be tough sledding. I would be so pleasantly surprised if Green Bay does it. But can they win 1? Yes, absolutely. And I know Philly's a daunting task that could be at hand for Green Bay. But again, talent-wise, I think Green Bay matches up pretty well. Maybe you lean towards Philly, that's fine. But it's not Iowa, Ohio State, and I keep referencing that because it's fresh in my mind as an Iowa fan watching them play at Ohio State in the shoe this year. It's not such a huge talent gap. It's not such a huge gap in, quarterback play. Like, there's a likelihood that Denver plays Buffalo in the first round wild card weekend, and I like what Sean Payton's doing with the Broncos, but do I think a rookie Bo Nix, a true rookie, Jordan Love was a first-year starter last year, but he wasn't a rookie. Do I think a true rookie in Bo Nix can go on the road and beat that Buffalo team, that Josh Allen, who's fighting with Lamar Jackson for the MVP award this year? I don't. There's not that's a wide gap to me. That would be a surprise if Denver were able to piece it together and beat Buffalo, if that is indeed the matchup on Wild Card Weekend, right? Obviously, things can still shake out differently in the AFC. With the Packers, who are on pace to be the 7 seed, like a Denver, or whoever else sneaks in, whether it's, Miami or Cincinnati. Green Bay has that 7, the seed next to their name, like a Denver potentially, but the talent's there, right? On paper, they stack up with Philly. They stack up with Minnesota, certainly, and I think they stack up with Detroit. So it's not a talent issue. It's not a the moment's too big issue. It's figure out these mistakes, try to compress them, limit them as much as you can. So we'll see. But yeah, I have, and I want to be wrong. Absolutely want to be wrong. Don't care if I am. Want to be wrong. But my stance has changed, and I know it's just 1 of 17, but it was a big one on Sunday. I've used that word a lot, but it was a large one. And Green Bay can win 1. I would be very surprised if they ripped off 3 straight, because they're 0-5 against teams that they're likely going to see in the playoffs this year. And if you want to cling to, well, you know what? It was a 34-29 loss to Philly. And, hey, it was only 34-31 in Detroit. And it was only 31-29 at Lambeau. And it was only 27-25 in Minnesota. Vikings led 28-0 in Lambeau. I was sick to my stomach. Vikings led 20-3 in this game and 27-10. I was sick to my stomach. Lions led 17-7, I think, in that 34-31 win before the Packers started to figure it out. Sick to my stomach. They're digging big holes early because of pre-snap penalties, dropped passes, head-scratching turnovers, things of that nature, and then trying to have to quickly dig out of those holes. Just can't do it against the better teams. So I think they can rip off 1. I don't know about 2. I want to say 3. My stance has pivoted, but we'll see. I want to be wrong about it. Expectations going to the playoffs. Please beat the Bears on Sunday. We'll have videos throughout the week, at least 1 more, likely 2, before Sunday's game against Chicago. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.